In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can install Microsoft SQL Server database in a clean architecture with ASP.NET Core version 8. So, I implemented a basic example of clean architecture in one of my previous tutorials. You can find the link of that video on the top of the screen and also on the video description. And you can download the codes from my GitHub and you can find the link of that GitHub repository in video description. Let's start. So the first thing is when we want to implement database in our project, we need to implement the domain entity. So let's go to our domain project and inside these entities, I have this class 1. Let's delete this and let's add a new class as our entity. So I want to create a student class as one of my entities. This is it. And let's change this to public class of student. And inside of that, I want to use an ID and a name and an email. A simple example, and let's use remove unnecessary using. So inside of this entity, which is a student, I want to have a long of ID and a string of name and a string of email. This is the first step. So we created our entity in the domain. The next thing is inside of this infrastructure, we need to implement our context. So first, let's install some package that we need. So let's go to the NuGet package. And here first, let's start the SQL Server installation. So Microsoft.SQL Server. That server, no, this is it, Microsoft.Framework Core.SQL Server. Let's install it. Apply, accept. This is the first package. The next package is tools because we need to use it for the migration commands and we need these tools. So let's install Microsoft.Framework Core.Tools. Install, apply, accept. This is it. This is the two packages that we need. So let's close them. And now let's go here in the infrastructure. So we need to implement a context, but because we may have some different databases, we can have multiple contexts. And even with one database, we can have multiple contexts. So I will create a new folder here, add a new folder with name of persistence. And inside of this persistence, let's add a new folder. And let's use name of MS SQL Server for it. So this is it. I created this persistent and SQL Server, and because of this, I don't need this context anymore. Let's delete this folder. And inside of this, let's add our context. So inside of Microsoft SQL Server, I create a new class, and I use a simple name for it. So I use app MS SQL DbContext. So you can use any name you want. I just use this simple name. So let's add it. So this is my context. Let's make this a public. And also, let's say this must inherit from my DB context, which is coming from Microsoft.Framework Core. And then let's press Ctrl dot and create a constructor for it. We need this constructor. You know that. I don't want to talk about everything here. So the next thing is this must be generic. So we pass my app MSDB context to it. And this is it. So let's press Ctrl dot here and remove unnecessary using. This is it. The first thing is here we created our DB context. The next thing is we need to create a public DB set for our entities as the table's name. So we need to have a reference to the domain. Normally we can use a reference directly to domain, but the thing is we can use another approach. We can use an reference from the application to domain, then we can reference the application and we have that reference to domain as well. So let's do this. Let's go to the application layer and here let's add a reference project to domain. This is it. And then inside of this infrastructure, let's add a project reference and let's add reference to the application. And also let's compilate the other thing. So let's check if the presentation API, let's go to the reference package. If it has, yes, you can see that the API has access to infrastructure and application, and that's right. Okay, let's close application API for now. So we created our context, and then the next step is to create an DB set for it. So let's create it. So I create a public DB set of a student with name of this student. And also, when we use this, you know that this is the table's name in your database. And also the next thing is we can configure this. So let me show you that how we can do this. We can use the override of on model creating. That's it. And inside of this on model creating, you can override anything you want. For example, I just add two simple functionalities here. So for the entity of a student, I want to change its table names to students or any other names, and I want to say this entity of a student has this key of ID. This is it. Let's delete these extra spaces, and our context configuration is finished. The next thing is we can run the migrations, but we need to have a connection string to connect to our database. And when we use an all-in-one project with Token architecture, everything would be happen in the API project, web API project. So we define our connection string in the app setting.json, and then we configure it inside of program.cs. But because we are using another dependency injection container for our infrastructure and also our application, we can do everything inside this dependency injection of our infrastructure. Just let's go and see how we can implement this. So inside this app setting, we need to create the connection string for it. And I will use this name of local MSSQL. Let me paste the value of it here quickly. So I use this connection string with server of dot, which is local database of clean arch test, trusted connection of true, trust server certificate of true, and also multiple active sets of true. So this is the connection string that I want to use, and I use it as this name of local MS SQL. I will copy this to use it. The next thing is we want to use these configurations inside of another project. So inside of program.cs, you can see that we don't want to use that here, but we created this add infrastructure DI and we are using that. So we can pass this connection to it. So how we can do this? Let's pass the configurations to it and use it. We can say that the builder that configuration must be passed to you and you need to use this, but it says that no overload of method and infrastructure takes one argument. So let's correct this. Let's go to the let me close this and go back to infrastructure. And here you can see that I have this dependency injection class in infrastructure, and I added this add infrastructure DI. So let's minimize this. Inside of this, I'm using this of iService collection of services, and I need to receive the I configuration of configuration. This is it. If you are not sure what is this class, you can see the previous tutorial about the clean architecture, and I speak about that there. So this is it. Before this written, we need to create our configuration. So let me add a new region here, and let me paste all of the codes here because it is faster, and then talk about it. So I added this services dot add DbContext, and I will add my instance of app MSSQL DbContext, and then we need to override it. So we pass the options to it, and we say that var of connection string is configuration dot get connection string of local MSSQL. That will come from here, connection string local MSSQL. And then we pass this and we use options that use SQL Server of connection string. Let's save and just let's change this region name to config MS SQL Server database. So this is it. For now, we created everything. So let's check them. So we first created this DB context and we said you have this student's example, and then we said on model creating, you need to change the table name and the key, and then we created the connection string here in the connection string of app setting, and in program.cs we passed that to this infrastructure DI, and then inside of this add infrastructure DI we receive the configurations, and using that we will configure our Microsoft SQL Server database with this context. So let's minimize it. For now, let's run and see do we have any error or not. So let's go to the view, other windows, and from here we can open package manager console. The thing is you must be sure that here on default project you use infrastructure, and then you need to be sure that this presentation API is your startup project. So let's right click on it and say set as a startup project. Let's open our package manager console again in the infrastructure. So let's add a new migration. So if I press tab and it completes, it means that the tools is installed. So let's say this is init to see if it's worse or again we need anything else. And we have error. Well, it says your startup project of API doesn't reference this package, Microsoft.NET Framework Core Design. So let's copy this quickly and install this on our application, our presentation API. So dependencies, manage NuGet package, browse, and paste enter. Microsoft.NET Framework Core Design. Let's install, apply, accept. Well, this is, let's close everything again and run our package manager console again in the infrastructure at migration of init. Okay, you can see that my migration is created and we can check that. Yeah, we have the create table of students with ID, name, email. That's good. Let's run another command. So we say update database. Let's test and see if we have any error or not. So build is successful, but we have error. It says only the invariant culture is supporting globalization invariant mode. Yes, let's disable this for now. Let's double click on the presentation API and in the invariant globalization, let's say false to avoid that error for now. And let's run update database again to see the result. Well, you can see that it is done. That's good. Now let's go and check our database to see if it's created or not. In the databases, well, you can see we have clean arc test, and in the tables, well, we have students. Let's see 1,000 rows. Okay, it's empty. That's good. So let's add some data to it to check that on the front end. So I added some simple rows to it, and if I press top 1,000 rows, you can see that now I have data in this SQL database. Let's go and fetch some of these data to test our database. Well, here let's close everything and let's pin it here. Okay, normally we don't call our context directly in our API, but this is just a test example. So let's add a new controller, API controller empty, and let's use test DB controller add. Okay, let me add some comments here. So normally don't use your context directly in controller. We don't do this. This is just for test, and we create different based on your project requirements. You may need to use CQRS or the services and iServices and repositories. But here I'm just testing my connection to database. But don't forget to don't do this and don't use directly your context in the controller. So let me add a private read-only of app Microsoft SQL DB context of context, and then let me use this generate constructor. So I will create a constructor for it, and also let's add an HTTP GET resource to this controller. This is just for testing our database. So I added a new HTTP GET and added a public async task action result of get students. And inside of that, I just called my context.students.toList async and I return an OK with its result. So let's run and see if it works or not. Well, this is it, my clean arch.presentation.api swagger. Let's go to test DB API and execute and see. Well, you can see that we have access to our database and our database is working correctly. So this is the only configurations you need to add database to your clean architecture project. I hope this video helps you. Let me know your opinions and comments in the comment section. Have a good time and goodbye.